What happens when dignity collides with prejudice at 35,000 feet, on a flight meant to embody comfort and luxury? A quiet act of cruelty turned the cabin into a silent battlefield. A black woman of extraordinary grace, Dr. Naomi Carter, carried with her not just a simple woven bag, but a story of life, heritage, and hope. Yet in the eyes of one flight attendant, that bag was nothing more than a symbol to mock, a reason to belittle. But here's the question: how far can casual cruelty go before it unravels everything? What happens when the very man she disrespected her passenger to impress turns out to be the one person she should never have crossed? Jonathan Hale, the CEO of the airline itself, and Naomi's husband. This is not just a story about an insult in the sky. It is about power, dignity, betrayal, and ultimately transformation. It asks us who truly holds authority, the one with the uniform, or the one with unshakable self-worth. Stay with us as we unravel this extraordinary journey from prejudice to justice, from humiliation to renewal. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss powerful stories like this. The polished chrome and muted gold of Celestia Airlines' Aurora Class cabin shimmered beneath soft, ambient lighting. It was a space designed to cradle its passengers in comfort, a sanctuary suspended above the world. Every surface gleamed with calculated elegance, champagne flutes already waiting on side tables, leather pods angled for privacy, and a fragrance of orange blossom drifting through the vents. The cabin was engineered to whisper one message here: you are untouchable. But for Dr. Naomi Carter, stepping into that space was less a promise and more a quiet reminder. She knew better than most that no wall of leather and crystal could insulate someone from prejudice. She had lived too many moments when bias had slipped past polished exteriors and polite smiles. Still, she drew a slow breath, forcing her shoulders to relax. Tonight, she told herself, she would simply be a tired traveler, not a surgeon, not a fighter, just a woman on her way home. Naomi eased into her pod, the soft ivory leather embracing her weary body. Her eyes lingered on the small carry-on she placed carefully at her side. The bag was no designer trophy but a hand-woven piece of West African artistry, its patterns alive with vibrant red, deep indigo, and threads of gold. A boy's family had given it to her years ago after she repaired his fragile heart during an operation that had stretched the limits of her skill. "This bag carries our gratitude," the boy's mother had told her, her hands trembling as she pressed it into Naomi's own. Since then, the bag had become more than luggage. It was memory. It was history. It was strength. Her colleagues back in Boston had teased her gently at times. Why not carry a Louis Vuitton like everyone else in first class? Why cling to something so simple? But Naomi never wavered. Each time her eyes rested on those hand-woven threads, she remembered why she had endured years of grueling training, sleepless nights and surgery, the relentless pressure of holding another person's life in her hands. It reminded her of purpose, not prestige. She smoothed the strap now with her fingertips, her lips curving into the faintest smile. The week had been exhausting. At the medical conference in New York, she had presented her research on innovative heart valve procedures, fielding relentless questions from colleagues who respected her but sometimes doubted her for reasons they would never say out loud. The applause at the end had been real, but so had the undercurrent. She had felt the constant demand to prove herself again and again. She had carried herself with calm professionalism, but inside she was bone-tired. All she wanted was the quiet anonymity of the sky. 7 hours to close her eyes and drift. Outside the window, the last lights of the city blurred as the ground crew bustled across the tarmac. Naomi thought of her husband, Jonathan Hale. He was supposed to be beside her, but a last-minute business crisis had held him back. "I'll catch the next flight," he had promised over the phone, his voice warm and steady even through her disappointment. She missed his presence. His quiet confidence had always been her anchor in stormy waters. She'd learned to stand alone, of course, but with Jonathan near, the world had always seemed a little easier to bear. She reached into her briefcase and slid out a medical journal, flipping it open more out of habit than interest. The words blurred almost immediately. What she really craved was silence. She leaned back against the headrest and let her eyes close, listening to the muffled symphony of boarding around her, the soft roll of suitcases, the clink of glasses being arranged, the polite murmur of attendants greeting passengers by name. For a moment, it almost felt safe. Almost. Because even here, Naomi knew, prejudice didn't check its baggage at the gate. She had seen the flickers before, the quick downward glance at her skin, the assessing pause at her simple clothing, the double take at her bag. They were micro-gestures, fleeting as a shadow across the moon, but she could always tell. She had trained herself to absorb them without reaction, to bury the sting deep beneath her calm. But tonight she felt fragile, worn thin, her defenses stretched. A thought crossed her mind, uninvited. What if someone decides, once again, that I don't belong here? She shook it off quickly, scolding herself. "Don't borrow trouble. Naomi," she whispered under her breath, "you've earned this seat. You've earned this space." Still, the unease lingered, curling in her stomach. She pressed her palm against the fabric of her bag, as if drawing strength from its threads. She thought of the boy whose heartbeat had thundered in her hands, fragile but determined. She thought of the family who had woven gratitude into every strand. That bag had survived airports, hotel lobbies, lecture halls, countless journeys. Tonight, it would survive another. The seatbelt light flickered above her, though the plane hadn't yet pushed back. Naomi took one last deep breath and tried to surrender to the illusion of luxury. She told herself the cabin would remain what it promised to be: peaceful, insulated, untouchable. But a whisper of intuition inside her said otherwise. The night sky waited outside, vast and unknowing, and somewhere in that sky, a storm was already gathering. The boarding process slowed as the last passengers filed into the Aurora Class cabin. Naomi kept her gaze steady on the open pages of her journal, though her eyes weren't moving. She didn't want to invite conversation. She wanted only to exist quietly, to let time pass without incident. A shadow moved across her row. She looked up. The flight attendant standing before her had the poise of someone who knew how to perform perfection. Her blonde hair was slicked back into a polished knot that pulled her features taut. Her makeup applied with clinical precision. The name tag pinned neatly to her uniform read Victoria Lane. She smiled, but the smile did not touch her pale blue eyes. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Carter," Victoria said smoothly, her tone carrying the effortless cadence of practiced courtesy. Her gaze flickered briefly to the bag resting in Naomi's lap. It was a quick glance, almost nothing, but Naomi saw the change. The corner of Victoria's mouth twitched, the faintest tightening of her nose as if she had caught a whiff of something sour. It lasted less than a second, but Naomi felt it as sharply as a slap. She had seen it before, countless times. The look that said, "You don't fit here." "Thank you," Naomi replied evenly, meeting her eyes without hostility, her voice calm and polite. She shifted slightly, preparing to stow her bag in the overhead compartment. Victoria's hand rose abruptly, halting the movement. Her voice was clear, pitched just high enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Careful with that," she said, her lips curving into a smile that was both saccharine and sharp. "We wouldn't want it to shed on Mr. Whitmore's luggage." She gestured gracefully toward the compartment where a sleek Louis Vuitton case sat nestled, its gold monogram gleaming beneath the lights. There was a subtle emphasis on the word that the implication hung in the air like smoke. Naomi froze. For a moment, she wasn't Dr. Naomi Carter, the surgeon whose hands had steadied countless fragile hearts. She wasn't the keynote speaker at an international conference, or the woman who had built a reputation on intellect and precision. In that single moment, in Victoria's eyes, she was simply a black woman holding a bag that didn't belong in the glossy world of Aurora Class. Her chest tightened, but she forced her hand to continue moving. She placed the bag carefully beside the Vuitton suitcase, her motions deliberate and unhurried. The click of the latch sounded unnaturally loud. She turned back to Victoria, her face calm, her voice low but steady. "My bag is perfectly fine," Naomi said. "It carries more value in a single thread than you can possibly imagine." For a brief instant, the mask of practiced hospitality slipped. Victoria's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing with a flash of irritation. She wasn't accustomed to being challenged, least of all by someone she had already dismissed in her mind. "Of course, ma'am," Victoria said quickly, her voice dipping into syrupy sweetness. "Just a little joke. Can I offer you a pre-departure beverage, champagne, orange juice, sparkling water?" "No, thank you," Naomi replied, settling back into her seat. She reached for her journal again, pulling it open with deliberate calm. On the cover, bold black letters spelled "Advances in Thoracic Aortic Surgery." She let it rest where Victoria could see it. The message was subtle but intentional. Victoria's eyes flickered to the title, then back to Naomi's face. The smile returned, but brittle now, forced. She pivoted gracefully and moved down the aisle, her voice lowering again into the pleasant murmur she reserved for the other passengers. Naomi exhaled slowly, feeling the knot in her chest loosen only slightly. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, but its weight lingered. It was not about the bag. It was never about the bag. It was about the unspoken assumption that she didn't belong, that she was an anomaly to be scrutinized. A younger attendant approached a moment later, her dark brown hair pulled into a loose bun, her movements quick but unsure. The tag on her chest read Emily Parker. She set a glass of water gently on Naomi's side table, her cheeks tinged pink. "I'm sorry about that, ma'am," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. She didn't meet Naomi's eyes. "Victoria, she can be." Naomi gave her a small, reassuring nod. "I know," she said quietly. "Thank you, Emily." The young woman's shoulders eased with relief. She slipped away before Victoria could notice the exchange. Naomi stared out the oval window, the glow of the runway lights smearing against the glass. She had promised herself she would let these things go. A single comment, a passing slight nothing compared to the challenges she had already faced in life. But the sting was sharp all the same. The weight wasn't in the single cut, but in the accumulation of thousands over the years, small wounds, each healing with scar tissue, each leaving a trace. Her mind drifted briefly to Jonathan. If he were here, he would have leaned forward, disarmed the moment with quiet authority, and reminded Victoria Lane that every passenger deserved dignity. Naomi missed that strength. She wanted to believe she could supply it for herself. But tonight, weariness clung to her like a heavy cloak. She pressed her palm flat against her chest, breathing deeply until the tension eased. Let it go, she told herself. Don't give her the satisfaction. The plane hummed as the engines roared to life. The cabin dimmed, soft amber lights glowing along the edges of the ceiling. The illusion of serenity returned. Yet Naomi felt the undercurrent, the subtle disruption in the air that only she seemed to sense. Across the aisle, she watched Victoria lean down toward a passenger in an expensive suit. Her laugh was light, her tone conspiratorial, her hand brushing the rim of his wine glass as she poured with perfect grace. For him, warmth. For Naomi, ice. The contrast was glaring, though unspoken. Naomi's eyes returned to her journal, but the words refused to stay in focus. The frustration rose in her throat like bile. She could endure physical exhaustion, grueling surgeries that stretched into dawn, nights with little food or sleep. But what wore her down most was this being reminded again and again that no matter her accomplishments, her presence in certain spaces was still questioned. The ascent began, the nose of the plane tilting upward, pressing her into the seat. The lights of the city glittered below before dissolving into a dark sea of cloud. The cabin exhaled into stillness. For everyone else, it seemed peaceful. For Naomi, it was the quiet before something she couldn't yet name. She reached again for her bag, letting her fingers trace the woven patterns. Strength, lineage, renewal. She let the texture ground her, tethering her to something larger than herself. Her heart slowed, her breath steadied. The war for dignity, she reminded herself, was never won in one grand moment. It was waged in 1,000 small encounters like this, each demanding patience, resilience, and the refusal to bow. Victoria Lane had delivered the first strike. Naomi sensed more would come, and she was right. The night would be long. The battle had only begun. Dinner service began less than an hour into the flight. The cabin lights dimmed to a soothing glow. Trays clinked softly, and the hush of luxury settled like velvet around the passengers. For many, it was the epitome of comfort. For Naomi, it was another arena. Victoria Lane moved through the aisle like a performer on a stage, her every gesture polished. She addressed each passenger by name, her tone a low, pleasant murmur, her eyes sparkling with practiced charm. When she reached Mr. Whitmore, the man with the Vuitton case, she lingered at his side, laughing quietly at his jokes, ensuring his glass of Bordeaux never dipped below half. When she stopped by Mrs. Alden across the aisle, she bent low to adjust a pillow, smoothing the blanket with genuine seaman care. Then she turned to Naomi. "And for you?" she asked flatly. Her tone clipped, her tablet held at chest level. No name, no eye contact, just a question lobbed like an obligation. Naomi sat a little straighter. "I believe I pre-ordered the seared halibut," she said, polite, measured, with the quinoa salad to start. Victoria tapped the tablet a moment too long, her expression neutral but tinged with something sharper. Finally, she looked up. I'm not seeing that here." We seem to be out of halibut. The chicken or the beef are available." Naomi blinked slowly. She had reserved the halibut weeks ago, meticulous as always, ensuring her preference was noted. The claim that it was unavailable rang hollow. Still, she registered the faint gleam in Victoria's eyes, the satisfaction behind the words. Naomi inhaled deeply, feeling the muscles in her jaw tighten. She could challenge her, she could insist, but the glint of provocation was clear. Victoria wanted the confrontation. "The chicken will be fine," Naomi replied softly. Her voice betrayed nothing. "Very good," Victoria said, pivoting away before Naomi had even finished speaking. When the tray arrived, the chicken was dry, the vegetables limp and lukewarm. Naomi glanced briefly at the passengers around her. Their plates gleamed with perfectly plated entrees, wine glasses refilled without request. She sipped her water, only to find the glass empty after 2 swallows. She waited. Minutes passed. The attendants glided past, offering more wine to Mr. Whitmore, replenishing Mrs. Alden's sparkling water. Naomi's empty glass remained untouched. At last, Emily Parker appeared at her side, cheeks flushed, setting down a fresh glass of water with a tremor in her hands. She glanced nervously toward the front of the cabin where Victoria stood, speaking in hushed tones with another attendant. "Thank you," Naomi said warmly, offering her a smile. Emily gave a quick nod, retreating without a word. Naomi lifted the glass slowly, her reflection wavering in the water. She tried to focus on the medical journal open on her tray, the bold black letters that once commanded her full attention. But the words blurred again and again. Her concentration frayed with each passing slight, each deliberate neglect. It wasn't about the chicken. It wasn't about the water. It was the pattern, the accumulation of small dismissals, each insignificant alone but suffocating together. A web of hostility woven thread by thread, invisible to anyone not caught within it. Naomi closed the journal, setting it aside. Her heart thudded heavily against her ribs. She wanted to shrug it off, to dismiss it as trivial, but she knew better. These were not random oversights. They were calculated. They were pointed. They were designed to remind her that, despite her ticket, her achievements, her place in the cabin, someone had decided she did not belong. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling lights. The sensation was familiar, painfully so. She remembered medical school, the professors who questioned her diagnoses more than her peers, the patients who asked if she was really the doctor. She remembered residency, the endless nights where she had to outwork and outshine everyone just to prove she was worthy of being there. She remembered conferences where her ideas were brushed aside until repeated by someone else with lighter skin or a deeper voice, each memory pressed down, one layer over another, until her chest felt tight. She closed her eyes, whispering inwardly to herself, "Stay calm, stay steady. Don't let her strip you of your peace." The meal ended, and attendants circulated with hot towels. One by one, passengers accepted them, wiping their hands, their faces, their fingers. The scent of citrus drifted through the cabin. Naomi's row was bypassed entirely. The tray never came near her seat. Her lips tightened. Her hands curled around the armrest. The silence and the neglect screamed louder than words. When the cabin quieted again, she unbuckled her belt and stood. She needed air. She needed distance. She walked to the front galley, intending only to ask for a bottle of water. The curtain swished closed behind her as she stepped into the narrow space. Then she froze. Victoria's voice floated through the air, low and sharp. "I just don't understand why they get to sit up here." It lowers the tone. First class is supposed to be exclusive. You can't tell me she paid for that seat. Naomi's blood chilled. Emily's softer voice murmured something inaudible, placating. "It's probably points," Victoria continued, her voice carrying an edge of disdain, "or some kind of diversity handout. And that bag, please. Looks like something you'd buy for $5 at a street market. Tacky." Naomi's pulse roared in her ears. The words struck like stones hurled one after another. Diversity handout. Street market. Tacky. Her hand gripped the counter for balance. Her knuckles pale. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Not from weakness, but from the sheer violence of the insult. She had fought her way to the pinnacle of her profession, carved her path with sacrifice and relentless determination. And here, she was reduced in seconds to a caricature in the mouth of a flight attendant who saw only skin and a bag. She could walk away. She could return to her seat, swallow the pain, let it simmer like so many times before. That was the safer path, the quieter path. But another voice rose inside her, deeper, firmer. No more. She inhaled, steadying herself. Then she stepped forward into the galley. The two attendants spun around, eyes wide, Emily's face drained of color, her mouth opening in silent shock. Victoria stiffened. The flicker of panic replaced quickly by a mask of icy composure. Naomi's voice was calm, barely above a whisper, but it filled the space with unshakable weight. "My name," she began, her eyes locked on Victoria's, "is Dr. Naomi Carter. Not she, not they. I am a cardiothoracic surgeon, and yes, I paid for my ticket. I paid for it with money I earned saving lives." She lifted her hand slightly, pointing to the bag slung over her shoulder. That street market bag was a gift. It was woven by the family of a boy who is alive today because of my work. It carries history, dignity, humanity, things you clearly lack. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emily trembled, her hands twisting in front of her. Victoria's face hardened, the mask cracking under the weight of Naomi's words. Naomi straightened, her presence filling the small galley. "Your behavior since boarding has been unprofessional, discriminatory, and pathetic. I want your full name and employee number. I'll be speaking to the purser, and when we land, I'll be filing a formal complaint with your head office." Her voice did not rise. She did not shout. She didn't need to. The quiet steel in her tone carried more force than any scream. Victoria's lips parted, her breath quickening. For once, she had no ready script, no polished charm to deflect, only silence. Naomi turned, her steps steady as she left the galley. Her heart pounded, but her spine was unbending. The cuts had accumulated, but she would not bleed quietly. Not this time. Naomi's steps back to her seat were measured, but her body trembled beneath the surface. She could still hear Victoria's words reverberating through her head like a cruel echo. Diversity handout, street junk, tacky. The insults clung to her skin like smoke, impossible to shake off. She sat down, hands folded neatly in her lap, forcing her breathing to steady. Around her, the cabin glowed with manufactured tranquility. Passengers sipped their wine, adjusted their blankets, tapped idly at tablets. The illusion was seamless, as if nothing were amiss. But to Naomi, the facade felt like glass stretched thin, ready to shatter. She had confronted people before. She had endured worse, yet this moment gnawed at her differently. Perhaps because she was so tired. Perhaps because the cruelty had been so casual, delivered in the lilt of everyday conversation, as if her dignity were nothing more than a disposable aside. She thought of Jonathan again. He had a way of seeing her anger before she voiced it, of absorbing it and redirecting it into something sharp, something effective. Without him here, she felt the loneliness of carrying it alone. Her fingers brushed the edge of her bag again. The woven threads whispered of resilience. The boy's family had woven gratitude into every fiber. They had trusted her with their son's heart, and now she had to trust herself to protect her own. The plane rocked gently through a patch of turbulence. Naomi's hand gripped the armrest, her jaw tightening. She knew she could not leave it here. If she walked away, the insult would not vanish. It would root itself deeper, becoming one more scar, one more unspoken story buried under composure. She stood again, moving down the aisle toward the galley. The curtain swished closed behind her, and the words struck her before she even announced her presence. "I swear." Victoria's voice was sharper now, no longer softened by the performance of service. She sticks out like a sore thumb. Aurora Class is supposed to feel refined, exclusive, but someone walks in with that. Naomi froze just out of sight. "Victoria," Emily whispered, her tone urgent. "Please, she might hear you." Victoria gave a short, disdainful laugh. "So what? Let her. What's she gonna do? File a complaint? No one would believe her. They never do. And honestly, if she wants to play the victim, that's on her." Naomi's pulse pounded in her ears. The words cut deeper than the earlier sneer because they revealed the truth behind the facade. This wasn't a single careless comment. It was a worldview. It was contempt dressed in uniform. She stepped forward. Both women turned instantly, their conversation dying mid-sentence. Emily's eyes went wide with horror, her face blanching. Victoria blinked once, surprise flashing before her features hardened back into defiance. Naomi's voice was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of steel. "I heard enough," she said. Silence thickened in the narrow galley. The hum of the aircraft filled the space, the steady thrum of engines a backdrop to the confrontation. Naomi moved closer, her gaze locked on Victoria's. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, or what I've sacrificed to sit in that seat. But I'll tell you what I am. I am Dr. Naomi Carter. I am a cardiothoracic surgeon. I have held the beating hearts of children in my hands and given them back to their families. I have spent nights in operating rooms that stretched until dawn, refusing to give up on a life. And yes, I paid for my ticket, with money I earned, honestly, through saving lives." She lifted her hand, gesturing to the bag. "That bag you called junk was a gift. It was given to me by a family whose son is alive today because I refused to let him die on my table. Every thread in that bag carries gratitude and history. It has more humanity woven into it than you've shown since I boarded this aircraft." Emily's eyes glistened. Her lips parted in shock. Victoria's jaw tightened, the muscle twitching as her mask began to crack. Naomi's tone sharpened, though her volume never rose. "Your behavior has been unprofessional, discriminatory, and cruel. I want your full name and your employee number. I'll be speaking to the purser, and when we land, I'll be filing a formal complaint with corporate—" Victoria's face flushed crimson, though her voice remained cold. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine." Naomi's eyes shifted to Emily. The young woman stiffened under her gaze, her lower lip trembling. "What about you?" Naomi asked quietly. "Will you say you saw nothing, that you heard nothing?" Emily's eyes darted between them, caught like a bird in a snare. Her fingers twisted nervously in front of her. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shook her head weakly. I didn't," she stammered, her voice breaking. The betrayal stung, though Naomi had expected it. The weight of fear pressed heavily on Emily's shoulders, and Naomi could see it. She was too young, too uncertain, too scared of the consequences. Still, the disappointment cut deep. Naomi exhaled slowly. "I see," she murmured. She turned back to Victoria. "Your cruelty doesn't surprise me, but your cowardice. Emily, it does. Both of you should think carefully about the kind of people you choose to be." With that, Naomi stepped past them, her shoulders square, her head held high. She pulled the curtain aside and walked back into the cabin. Her heart raced, her palms slick with sweat, but her stride did not falter. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. As she sank into her seat, her chest rose and fell with deliberate breaths. The window beside her reflected her own face calm, dignified, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. She wanted Jonathan beside her. She wanted the quiet authority of his presence, the assurance of his hand resting over hers. But tonight, she had stood alone. The cabin around her carried on as if nothing had happened. Mr. Whitmore laughed loudly at something in a newspaper. Mrs. Alden rang her call button for another glass of wine. The hum of conversation resumed, oblivious to the confrontation that had just unfolded behind the curtain. Naomi leaned back, pressing her palm once again to the bag at her side. Its woven threads seemed to pulse with memory, with strength borrowed from a family she had once saved. She whispered to herself, so quietly no one could hear. "You held your ground. You did not break." But as Victoria brushed past her seat moments later, refusing to look at her, Naomi felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew this wasn't over. The battle for dignity was rarely won in a single skirmish. It was a long war, waged in small, grueling confrontations. Victoria Lane had made her contempt clear, and Naomi Carter knew the knot was only going to get harder. Outside the window, the Atlantic stretched endlessly, the dark waves invisible beneath the moonless sky. The engines hummed their steady lullaby, carrying everyone forward toward London. For most, the flight would be uneventful. For Naomi, it had already become a battleground, and the war had only just begun. The hum of the engines had become almost hypnotic, a low vibration that filled the cabin. Naomi sat still, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the faint reflection in the window. Her pulse had slowed from its earlier race, but her chest still rose and fell with deliberate breaths. She knew every passenger around her believed the night was calm, serene. No one saw the storm she carried inside. Her confrontation in the galley replayed in her mind. Each word, each syllable, each flicker in Victoria's eyes. She felt both relief and frustration. Relief that she had spoken, that she had not swallowed the insult. Frustration because she knew it had not ended. Victoria's silence was not surrender. It was retreat. Naomi could sense the venom coiled beneath the surface, waiting for its next strike. She turned her gaze down to her lap. Her hands were clasped tightly together, the knuckles pale. She forced herself to ease the grip, to relax her fingers against the fabric of her skirt. That was always the battle, not letting the anger consume her, not letting the hurt twist into bitterness. She had promised herself long ago she would not allow the world's prejudice to make her hard. But sometimes the effort exhausted her more than surgery ever could. Her mind wandered back to medical school, to a night when an attending physician had doubted her diagnosis of a rare congenital defect. She had been correct, but he had dismissed her, only to later praise a male colleague for repeating her words. She remembered the sting, the quiet fury, the vow she had made never to let such moments silence her again. Tonight felt the same. Except this time the battlefield wasn't a hospital ward but an airplane cabin dressed in leather and gold. Her eyes flicked toward the aisle just as Victoria passed by again. The flight attendant moved with choreographed grace, tending to others, her voice warm, her smile wide. When she reached Naomi's row, her warmth vanished like a light extinguished. She placed a tray of fruit and cheese on the side table without a word, her movements brisk. Naomi lifted her eyes to meet hers. The silence between them was louder than any insult. "Thank you," Naomi said quietly. Her tone was calm, her posture unbroken. Victoria gave a curt nod, then turned away. Naomi picked up a piece of fruit and set it down again untouched. The food had no taste. Her appetite was gone. She reached instead for her bag, pulling it onto her lap, her fingers tracing the woven threads as if they might anchor her. She thought again of Jonathan. His voice would have cut through the charade with ease. He had a way of speaking softly yet leaving no room for argument. She wished for his steady presence beside her now, for the comfort of knowing she was not alone in the fight. A ripple of doubt passed through her. Should I have stayed silent? Should I have endured it quietly, preserved the illusion of peace? The thought lingered, heavy and tempting. After all, the world often punished those who spoke out more harshly than those who committed the wrong. She had seen colleagues branded as troublemakers for less. She could already imagine Victoria twisting the story, painting Naomi as oversensitive, unreasonable, angry. The stereotype was always waiting, ready to be pulled like a weapon. Naomi closed her eyes. The temptation to retreat tugged at her, whispering of rest, of quiet, of letting it slide. But she remembered the look in Victoria's eyes when she had spoken in the galley. Not shock, not regret, defiance, confidence that she would escape consequences. If Naomi stayed silent, that confidence would be justified. Her eyes opened, steady and clear once more. Silence was not dignity. Dignity was standing, even when her voice trembled. She leaned back, her shoulders squaring. She would not allow Victoria's cruelty to define her night. She would finish this flight with her head high, even if her heart carried bruises. The cabin grew still as the meal service ended. Lights dimmed further, casting everything in a warm amber glow meant to lull passengers into rest. One by one, seats reclined, shades lowered, screens flickered with muted films. Naomi tried to close her eyes, but her body resisted rest. Her mind replayed every moment since boarding, the weight of them pressing against her chest. She shifted, exhaling deeply, willing her muscles to soften. A voice broke the quiet. "Dr. Carter." Naomi opened her eyes. Emily stood there, clutching a bottle of water. Her expression was anxious, her posture hesitant. "Yes," Naomi asked softly. Emily set the bottle on Naomi's table. "I thought you might want this," she said quickly, her eyes darting toward the front of the cabin. Naomi studied her. The young woman's face was pale, her lips pressed tight as if holding back words. There was something in her eyes, fear. Yes, but also shame. "Emily," Naomi said gently, "you don't have to be afraid of me." The attendant swallowed hard, her hands twisting. I didn't know what to say," she whispered. "Back there." Naomi's gaze softened. "I understand," she said. "Fear is powerful, but so is truth. You'll have to decide one day which you serve." Emily's eyes shimmered. She nodded quickly, then stepped back, retreating before Naomi could say more. Naomi sighed, lifting the bottle of water. The gesture was small, but it carried meaning. Perhaps Emily would find her courage. Perhaps not. Time would tell. She sipped slowly, her throat dry. The water cooled her, grounding her. The minutes dragged on. She shifted again, staring at the ceiling, then at the window where the stars glowed faintly above the Atlantic. She wanted sleep, but rest would not come. Her body remained taut, her mind restless. When Victoria returned again, her presence was sharp. She checked on passengers with gentle touches, quiet questions, then glided past Naomi without a glance. The message was clear. To Victoria, Naomi was invisible. Naomi turned her eyes to her journal again, opening it though she had no intention of reading. The bold title across the cover gleamed beneath the soft light. She left it open on her lap, visible, a quiet declaration. Her lips curved into a faint smile, not of amusement but of defiance. She would not vanish. The hum of the engines deepened as the plane leveled into its long transatlantic stretch. Naomi exhaled, allowing her shoulders to sink a little. She folded her hands again over the woven bag, her thumb tracing the threads. She whispered to herself, just above a breath, "Hold your ground. You're not less, you're not invisible." The words steadied her. The night stretched long ahead, heavy with unspoken battles. But Naomi Carter had faced harder trials than this. She had fought for lives, clawed back hope from the brink of despair. She would not lose herself here. The cabin dozed. The sky outside was endless, a dark sea above a darker ocean. Somewhere deep in her chest, the knot of anger coiled still, but she pressed it down, shaping it into resolve. Victoria Lane might believe she had diminished her. She might believe her cruelty carried no consequence. But Naomi knew better. Every injustice left a trace, and every trace left a story. And Naomi's story was not finished. The cabin had settled into a hushed rhythm. A few passengers watched films with headphones pressed to their ears. Others slept with blankets drawn high over their shoulders. The lights glowed low and warm, mimicking a twilight that never shifted. Naomi sat awake, her hands resting on her lap, her body still but her mind turbulent. She had resolved to hold her ground, to carry her dignity like armor. But the fatigue was heavy. Each breath felt deliberate, each thought sharp as glass. She longed for the soft steadiness of her husband's presence, for the quiet reassurance of his hand over hers. Her eyes closed for a moment, her head leaning gently back. She willed herself to surrender to rest. The curtain at the front of the cabin rustled. A tall figure stepped through, his dark suit tailored, his tie slightly loosened as though he had run. His shoulders carried both weariness and authority. His eyes searched quickly, scanning until they found her. Relief softened his expression, followed immediately by concern. "Naomi," his voice rumbled low, warm and steady, a sound that seemed to reach directly into her chest. Her eyes opened fully, disbelief flashing across her face. For a heartbeat, she forgot the weight pressing on her. "Jonathan," she whispered. Her voice trembled with the mix of shock and profound relief. "Your meeting. You weren't supposed to." "It finished early," he said, moving swiftly toward her seat. "I ran to the gate. I wasn't going to let you fly alone." Her composure cracked for the first time all evening. She felt her throat tighten, the dam of restraint buckling. "I thought," she began, then stopped, her words dissolving into a shaky breath. Jonathan knelt beside her seat, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced gentle circles over her skin, grounding her. "Tell me," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "What happened?" Naomi hesitated, glancing toward the aisle. At the far end, Victoria Lane stood rigid, her face caught between shock and calculation. Emily lingered nearby, her expression pale and strained. "It's nothing," Naomi murmured, lowering her gaze. She didn't want to make a scene, not here, not now. She wanted peace, not escalation. Jonathan squeezed her hand firmly. "Naomi, look at me." She lifted her eyes. The steadiness in his gaze held her, stripped away her attempt at dismissal. "What happened?" he asked again, his tone even, patient, but unyielding. She exhaled slowly. The truth pressed against her lips, demanding release. "The flight attendant," she whispered, her voice low. "From the moment I boarded, she mocked my bag, she withheld service, she spoke about me in the galley, called me names, said I didn't belong here, said my seat was probably some kind of diversity handout." Jonathan's face did not change, but a stillness settled over him. It was the same stillness Naomi had seen in boardrooms when he prepared to dismantle a flawed argument or end a negotiation with finality. It was calm, but beneath the calm burned a fire. His hand tightened over hers. Then, slowly, he rose to his full height. His gaze shifted, landing squarely on Victoria. The air in the cabin changed. It was subtle, like the shift in pressure before a storm. But everyone felt it. Even passengers pretending to sleep opened their eyes, sensing the current of power threading through the space. Jonathan stepped into the aisle, his movements unhurried, his eyes locked on Victoria's name tag. "Victoria Lane," he said evenly. His voice was soft, almost conversational, but it carried across the cabin with undeniable weight. Victoria froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her features stark beneath the soft light. "My wife tells me you've had concerns about her luggage," Jonathan continued, his tone deceptively calm, "that you've withheld service, that you've spoken of her with words I will not repeat." Passengers shifted in their seats, eyes widening. A murmur spread in hushed tones, quickly silenced by the gravity of his words. Victoria opened her mouth, but only a stammer escaped. "Sir, there must be some misunderstanding. I was simply following." Jonathan raised a hand, silencing her effortlessly. He did not look away, his gaze unwavering, his expression carved from stone. "Is it policy," he asked softly, "to mock a passenger's belongings, to imply they are dirty? Is it policy to deny service, to treat a woman who has paid for her seat as if she is an intruder?" Victoria's lips parted soundlessly. She glanced around as if seeking an ally, but found only silence. The other passengers stared openly now, some with curiosity, others with disapproval. Jonathan took a step closer. He was not imposing in the brutish sense, but his presence filled the space, his authority radiating without effort. "You are on my aircraft," he said. his voice dropping to a whisper that was more dangerous than any shout. "You are wearing a uniform with my company's name stitched on it, and you have insulted my wife." The words landed like a gavel. Victoria's eyes widened, horror dawning as realization struck. Her gaze darted to Naomi, then back to Jonathan. Her mouth opened again, her words faltering. Your wife." At that moment, a passenger in the second row lowered his newspaper, his voice carrying enough for the surrounding cabin to hear. Good heavens, that's Jonathan Hale. The name rippled through the space like a spark across dry grass. Whispers spread instantly, recognition dawning in faces one by one. The CEO, the man who had rebuilt Celestia Airlines into a global powerhouse. The man whose face had graced magazine covers, who was known not only for his wealth but for his influence. The realization hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had not merely insulted a passenger. She had insulted the wife of the CEO. Her body stiffened, her face contorted between disbelief and panic. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jonathan's expression remained cold, his tone cutting. "That's the problem. Victoria, you shouldn't have to know." Silence blanketed the cabin. Even the hum of the engines seemed subdued beneath the weight of his words. Naomi sat in her seat, her chest rising and falling. She had not asked for rescue, had not expected this moment, but relief washed over her nonetheless. The storm she had carried alone now belonged to both of them. Victoria stood frozen, her mask of perfection shattered. Emily's hands twisted at her side, her face pale, her eyes shimmering with tears. Jonathan turned back to Naomi, his expression softening only for her. He knelt again, taking her hand gently. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice quiet, for her ears alone. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Naomi's eyes closed briefly, the knot in her chest loosening for the first time that night. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "It was never about you. It was about her." Jonathan shook his head slightly. "No, it's about this company, and that makes it mine to fix." He pressed her hand softly, then rose again, his posture sharp, his voice turning crisp as he looked to the purser, who had emerged from the forward galley, her face taut with concern. "Please relieve Miss Lane of her duties for the remainder of this flight," Jonathan instructed, his tone steady, commanding. "She will not interact with passengers again. Assign another attendant to cover her section. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mr. Hale," the purser said quickly, her voice firm. Victoria's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. She knew there was no recovery, no charm that could undo what had been revealed. Jonathan looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with quiet, unmistakable disgust. Then he turned away, dismissing her completely. The silence in the cabin remained unbroken, heavy and charged. Naomi leaned back into her seat, her fingers resting once more on the bag at her side. The woven threads felt different now, not just a reminder of strength, but a reminder that even in the darkest nights, she was not alone. The war was not over, but the balance had shifted. The silence in the Aurora Class cabin stretched so long it felt like time itself had stalled. Naomi sat very still, her hand clasped in Jonathan's, her breath uneven. She could feel every pair of eyes pressing toward them. She wasn't used to being the center of attention outside of operating rooms, and never like this. Jonathan stood calmly in the aisle, his presence filling the space, commanding without effort. The purser, a woman with graying hair pulled neatly into a bun, stood close by, her hands folded tightly before her. Her name tag read Margaret Holden. Her face was carefully composed, but her eyes flickered between Jonathan and Victoria with apprehension. Jonathan turned to Margaret, his voice crisp, measured. "Margaret, assume you are the purser on this flight?" "Yes, Mr. Hale," she said quickly. "Good," Jonathan replied. His tone softened slightly, but the authority remained. "Please take immediate charge of this cabin. Ms. Lane is relieved of duty. She is to remain in the galley or crew rest area until we land. She will not interact with passengers again." "Yes, sir," Margaret responded, already motioning to another attendant to cover the section. Jonathan's gaze shifted to Emily, who lingered near the galley, pale and trembling. She seemed caught between the desire to vanish and the need to stay rooted where she was. Jonathan studied her for a long moment. His eyes were not cold, but they were unflinching. "Emily," he said, his tone even, "you will provide a full written statement before this flight ends. Every detail of what you witnessed. No embellishments, no omissions." Emily swallowed hard, her lips parting. "Yes, Mr. Hale," she whispered. "And Margaret," Jonathan continued, "you will also take Dr. Carter's account. I want it documented in full, unfiltered. 2 statements, separate, clear." "Yes, sir," Margaret said firmly. The weight of his words settled over the cabin. Passengers who had been pretending to read now lowered their magazines. A man across the aisle leaned forward, his expression grim with interest. A woman, 2 rows back, whispered something to her companion, silenced quickly by the tension in the air. Jonathan turned back to Naomi, lowering himself into the empty seat across the aisle from her. His focus was entirely on her once more. "You're safe," he murmured. His hand reached across, resting gently on hers again. Naomi exhaled slowly, her chest loosening. Relief warred with unease. She hated that the entire cabin had been drawn into her humiliation, hated that her private struggle had become spectacle, yet she could not deny the quiet comfort of Jonathan's presence, the shield of his authority pressing back against the cruelty she had endured. She leaned toward him, her voice low. "I didn't want this to become public." Jonathan's eyes softened. "I know, but she made it public the moment she tried to strip you of dignity in front of others. Silence would only let it fester." Naomi looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her bag. She wanted to believe him, but the knot in her chest hadn't completely eased. She had defended herself. Yes, but now everything was exposed, the whispers, the stares, the curiosity. She loathed being turned into a spectacle. Jonathan, sensing her unease, leaned closer. His voice was warm, private. "This isn't about proving your worth. Naomi, you already did that 1,000 times over. This is about making sure the system doesn't excuse her behavior again." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, absorbing his words. He was right, yet the ache remained, an ache born not from doubt in herself, but from exhaustion with the endless battle. Across the aisle, Victoria still stood frozen near the galley curtain, her eyes wide, her hands twisting. Margaret gave her a curt signal, and reluctantly she stepped back behind the curtain, vanishing from sight. The sound of it closing echoed like a door slamming on her career. The passengers slowly returned to their pretense of normalcy, but the atmosphere remained taut. Conversations were hushed, glances stolen toward Naomi and Jonathan. The sense of something momentous lingering in the air would not dissolve so easily. Margaret returned moments later with a notepad, her professionalism a shield against the tension. "Dr. Carter," she said quietly, "whenever you are ready, I will take your statement." Naomi hesitated. Her instinct was to delay, to keep her story confined to her own heart until she had the strength to release it. She could see the turmoil written across her face, the fear of betraying her senior colleague warring against the weight of her own conscience. Naomi offered her the smallest of nods, silent encouragement. Emily swallowed hard. "Yes," she whispered. Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his gaze steady on the aisle ahead. His presence radiated calm, but Naomi could feel the force of his restraint. Beneath his composed exterior, fury burned cold and precise. She had seen it before in the world of business, when he dismantled deceit with quiet ruthlessness, but this was different. This was personal. She reached across the aisle, her fingers brushing his. "Don't let them turn this into a war," she murmured softly. "I don't want revenge. I want respect." Jonathan turned his hand, clasping hers. "Respect is exactly what you'll have. Not just for you, Naomi, for anyone who's ever been treated the way you were tonight." Her throat tightened at his words. She looked at him, seeing not just the CEO, but the man she had married, the man who carried her burdens as if they were his own. The rest of the cabin dimmed further as the attendants began preparing passengers for rest, but no one could truly rest now. The energy had shifted permanently. The story was already spreading in whispers, rippling quietly through the rows. Victoria Lane sat alone behind the curtain, her perfect image shattered, her career unraveling with every passing minute. Emily Parker sat stiffly, her hands shaking, preparing herself to write the truth. Margaret Holden moved with practiced precision, already planning the chain of reports she would file. And Naomi Carter sat quietly in her seat, her bag resting in her lap, her hand held firmly in her husband's. She had not chosen this battle, but she would not hide from it. The reckoning had begun at 35,000 feet, and the echoes of it would not stop when the plane landed. The hush of Aurora Class deepened as the night stretched across the Atlantic. The lights glowed in muted amber, and the faint hum of engines pressed like a lullaby. But no one in the forward cabin was lulled to sleep. The earlier confrontation lingered like a thundercloud that refused to pass. Naomi sat reclined in her seat, but rest remained impossible. Her body was still, yet her mind whirled in restless circles. She had spoken her truth. Jonathan had wielded his authority. Margaret had recorded every detail. And yet the unease remained. The cuts she had endured left their sting long after the words were spoken. She closed her eyes, trying to slow her breathing. Jonathan's presence across the aisle was both anchor and mirror. She felt safe under his gaze, but she also knew he carried her hurt as his own. That knowledge made her chest ache. Her thoughts pulled her back to the moment in the galley, to Victoria's voice dripping with disdain. "It lowers the tone. Diversity handout. Tacky." The cruelty had been casual, tossed like scraps. That was what lingered most. Not the sharpness of the insult, but the ease with which it was delivered, as if her worth could be discarded without thought. She whispered inwardly to herself, "You are more than this. You're not what she called you." But another voice, quieter, crept in. "How many more times will you have to fight this fight? How many more nights will end in the same battle? Her eyes opened again, searching across the aisle. Jonathan was watching her, his posture calm, his eyes steady. He didn't speak, but his gaze carried reassurance. She met it, drawing strength, yet also feeling the fatigue of being strong too often. Jonathan leaned slightly toward her. His voice was soft, private. "What are you thinking?" Naomi hesitated, then let the words slip free. "I'm thinking of how exhausting it is. How many times I've had to prove what should be obvious. That I belong, that I earned my place." She had fought so long to be strong for herself that surrender felt dangerous, even to the man she trusted most. She whispered back, almost to herself, "If I let go, will the world see it as weakness?" Jonathan's reply came steady and sure. "The world already misjudges you. You cannot live by its gaze. Leaning on me isn't weakness, Naomi, it's love." She closed her eyes, breathing in his words. Slowly, she nodded. Behind the curtain of the galley, Victoria Lane sat alone. The hum of the aircraft was louder here, the metallic clinks of service carts echoing hollowly in the confined space. Her hands shook as she dabbed at the smudged lines of mascara beneath her eyes. Her perfect mask had cracked beyond repair. Her mind spun with panic. She thought of her career, of the long climb to reach this position, of the prestige she had wrapped around herself like armor. Now, in a single evening, it was slipping away.